Travel Growth Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Travel Growth Podcast. This is where I speak to successful travel business leaders and dig into the successes, challenges, and learnings from their experiences over the years, so you, the listener, can take away actionable advice to enhance your own businesses and maybe even lives too. This is episode 1 of the podcast, with hopefully many more to come, and I'm really excited to launch it and share some intriguing, insightful, and mind-blowing stories with you in the coming weeks, which hopefully you'll find helpful on your own journey. My guest today is Gavin Bate. Gavin is the founder of Adventure Alternative, an adventure travel company that offers climbing expeditions, trekking holidays, and safaris around the world. He also founded Moving Mountains alongside this, an international charity working in Kenya, Tanzania, and Nepal, aimed at relieving poverty through education, health, and social welfare programs. Gavin has done some amazing things in his life. He has walked across the Sahara Desert solo, climbed Everest 5 times, numerous without oxygen, raised £200,000 for comic relief by summiting the highest peak on every continent for the millennium celebrations, and he's raised millions of pounds for Moving Mountains through his extraordinary exploits over the years. He is quite a man. I've had the pleasure of knowing Gavin for a few years now, and I believe the most surprising thing about him is actually just how unassuming and down-to-earth he is when you understand the context of the things that I've just said. Underneath it all, he's a wonderful human being, and it was a pleasure to sit down with him and force him to share some of these incredible stories which he otherwise keeps under his hat in most situations. This conversation has everything from crazy adventure stories to life-affirming advice that will help you get more out of your day-to-day existence. There's also plenty to take from it from a business perspective, whether that's the importance of having a mission and meaning behind your work, or the future of travel and how to create a business that has a successful future, and much more besides. I hope you enjoy listening to this as much as I loved recording it. Gavin is a truly inspiring human, and I can't think of a better person to launch the podcast with. So, without further ado, this is me talking to Gavin Bate. Gavin, hi, welcome to the show.
Tom, pleasure to talk to you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, really good. Super excited to have you on. Really looking forward to talking to you. People might not have heard of you who are speaking to this as yet, but I'm hopeful that once they have heard more from you, that they'll be inclined to dig around, find out a little bit more about you and what you're doing, because yeah, I've been thoroughly inspired by our work together and hearing more about the things you do. So yeah, looking forward to kind of being the conduit to share it with more people, hopefully.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I mean, I do feel myself nowadays to be a bit of a veteran of the adventure travel industry because it's been, 30 odd years now. But I also have actively kind of stayed under the radar. I'm very happy to run my own little operation and not be out there. But having said that, it is really nice to talk about things in kind of hindsight and look back over all these adventures.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start kind of back at the beginning, and what first got you interested in travel and kind of in climbing and the mountains more specifically?
Well, first of all, it was never in our family. We weren't a family of travelers or climbers. In fact, the family joke is that when I was born, I abseiled out of my mother, and none of my brothers were into climbing or whatever. I was just a very curious and kind of adventurous boy, as far as I gather from my mum and dad, and I was also a voracious reader, and I think the reading is just key. Right from a very, very young age, I read and read and read, and I still do, and it's still the stimulus for so many adventures and ideas that I have. But the catalyst was school, and like so many climbers and kind of adventurers who I've met over the years, that all-important teacher who in my case, introduced me to Scottish Hills with the school trips up there, and I just have a very clear recall of being up in the Highlands, and just thinking, this is amazing. This is honestly the most incredible experience, and that is really where it all began.
Nice. So you, like you say, you got into your reading, and then you went to. By the time you got to uni, you did English literature at university. And what happened from there? Kind of, where did you go once you'd finished uni and done your degree? What was your next step?
Well, to kind of take that strand of being a bit adventurous, my parents had obviously recognized that trait in me, and they also saw that school in England appeared to be something I didn't enjoy. And it's true, I really didn't like school in England. Um, so they invited me to leave home at 14 years old and go to Australia, and I took that opportunity. I mean, I had
Okay.
a wonderful family life. It was absolutely kind of like an Enid Blyton story, really. Um, but they said to me, if you really want to kind of do something, here's an opportunity. We've got family friends in Western Australia in Perth. You can go and live with them and do your schooling there. And I said yes. And I left home at 14 and well, 14 and a half, going on 15. And I stayed there till I was 18, did my exams, and came back from this kind of neighbours style existence on the beaches of Perth, having really become quite independent at a young age. And I came back and I had missed the whole university application process in the UK. I desperately wanted to go back to Australia. I had a big plan to go around with my friend around the whole coast with a sailboat and just kind of travel. But I'm not Australian, so I would have had to pay all those university fees. My parents weren't wealthy at all. I'd I'd had to kind of work my way through school actually in Australia, and so I ended up working as a labourer in England for a while, actually on the Channel Tunnel, with a lot of Irish labourers who said to me, "You don't need any application to go to an Irish university. Just turn up and they'll let you in." And that's exactly what happened. I hitched to Belfast, and they let me in, and I studied English literature, which was a big difference in lifestyle from kind of Western Australia to the gritty, kind of post-troubles environment of Northern Ireland. But I loved and still love Northern Ireland. I think the people are wonderful. I really, really enjoy the character of Northern Irish people. And but there were no jobs. It was an absolute desert coming out of a degree in English literature. So the day after graduation, I hitched down to through Europe to Piraeus, and I got on board a ship. I got a job on a ship which was bound for China, and it was a ship that was going to be beached and broken up for scrap, for demolition. So the crew on the ship, when we were kind of like pirates, kind of outlaws, really. It was really quite a change for me from university life. And yeah, it took about 6 months to get to China. And then I hitched back from China back to Ireland. And I came back, I saw my friends again, and most of them were just sitting in the same place, having done nothing. There were no jobs. Certainly, no few people were doing anything related to their degree. And I just thought, no, this is not for me. And I went off
Yeah.
again. And the next year, I began my first big expedition, which was to walk across the Sahara Desert. Across the
Right.
Sahara Desert. So yeah, that was really the beginning of that whole kind of approach to life.
Yeah. Amazing. So when you first when you so firstly, can you clarify what you mean by hitched? When you say you hitched down to Greece, and then then from there you hopped on the ship, and then when you were doing that, did you have a kind of grand plan, or was it literally just let's set off and see where this takes us?
No grand plan. They're almost. I can't really think of many times in my life where there's been a grand plan, except for really specific mountains, like the times I've climbed Everest. There was a plan there. Um, No, I had no money. Hitching was the way I moved around the place. And during university, I had continued my passion for climbing, and I'd become really into rock climbing. And then, of course, winter climbing in Scotland, which is a kind of is a kind of genre all of its own within mountaineering, and it's spectacular. It's you could spend your whole lifetime never doing anything except Scottish winter mountaineering, and be a very happy person. So every single weekend, me and my mates, we would hitch across down through Northern Ireland, get on the ferry on a £5 ticket, hitch up to Glasgow and beyond, get up to the mountain, get to the car park, put our tent up late at night, and the next morning we would just climb, mostly on places like the north face of Ben Nevis, um, and we just did that all the time. I was obsessed. I was really obsessed with it. And then during the summer, rock climbing on the sea cliffs around Northern Ireland. So hitching for me was easy, and the idea of just putting on a backpack and putting a thumb out with no real plan was quite normal in a way. It was. I liked that, and a lot of my reading at the time was about that kind of freedom, that lifestyle, that kind of um, that kind of form of travel. I was very drawn to travel and exploration, not just physically but of the mind as well. I was really into that, and still am actually. I don't do as much of it, but it's still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of segues nicely into the Sahara trip. So, that combination of kind of physical and mental challenge. So that you decide go back to the start of I. At what point do you think I'm gonna go and walk across the Sahara Desert? What's going through your head? Why was that the thing that you decided to
Oh,
do?
again, it all traces back to the reading. Wilfred Thesiger and his desert travels. I mean, what an enormous influence on me. And as a kind of um, impressionable teenager reading people like Wilfred Thesiger and desert explorers, it was just food for my imagination. So I was very, very taken by some of the desert stories I'd written, I'd read about, and I'm not saying I was trying anything new. I just wanted to see if I could do it. The Sahara's been crossed. It's nothing new, but there was great stories about the search for Timbuktu. Going back to Victorian times, and how the French tried to colonize North Africa, and the missionaries who crossed the desert to bring Christianity to these places, and this kind of search for cities where the roofs were made of gold, and so on. That was really, yeah, that was that motivated me, and I thought, well, I want to try this, and obviously I loved my climbing, but it was really the whole world of exploration and adventure that attracted me. So again, it was kind of decision that I would just go there and try it. I always took the view that if I if it just didn't work, then I just come home again. Like, that was it, really. I wasn't kind of committing myself to something ridiculous. I was just going to try it. And yeah, that's been my view of a lot of things, actually. Just try it, because if you try it and you fail on day one, at least you've tried. And a lot of people, as a guide now, and my job, a lot of people come to me and say, "Oh, I'd really like to climb this. I'd like to do that. What do you think?" And my answer is always, "Yeah, try it. If you don't do it on day one, or on day two or day three, you say, 'No, this isn't for me,' that's irrelevant. You've tried it, and that's the
Mm.
important thing. And there's a leap of faith that you have to make in your head to just start that first step. And starting that first step is an important discovery in life. I think that
Yeah,
it always begins with that. Everybody knows that, but it is true, and some people find that difficult.
yeah.
So yeah, I didn't tell my parents though. I wasn't that stupid. I just because I knew the reaction. But I did stop off on the way. I hitched again. I was in Northern Ireland, so I hitched down to see them, and with my rucksack, and I said, "I'm going off I'm going off to walk across the Sahara. And they just looked at me. And 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 I left. And well, that is actually quite an important part of the story, because um, my parents were quite used to me by that stage, by all this kind of moving around and climbing or whatever. But weeks and weeks later, I mean, really many weeks later, um, I was in the desert, and I was looking through my rucksack, and I was throwing out all the stuff which I realized I didn't need for a proper desert explorer. And I noticed something which I hadn't seen before in my rucksack at the bottom, and it was silver and it glinted. And I, I pulled it out. I was sitting there. I have such a strong recollection of this, and it was a silver packet which I unwrapped, and in it were some sandwiches, and they were full of sand, totally inedible. And it was my mum who'd put a little packet of sandwiches in my rucksack just for the journey. And I cried and cried my heart. I absolutely sobbed there, sitting in the desert. And when I wrote about my adventures afterwards, not that I have written a book or anything, but the title of that book would be "Sand in My Sandwiches," because it was such a powerful moment. And then later on, when I actually got down to the southern end of the Sahara in southern Algeria, and I was now somewhat, somewhat initiated into the world of desert travel. Um, I was able to get to a phone in a tiny little town called Tamanrasset, which is in the Hogar Mountains of southern Algeria. Um, and I think by that time I really had gone quite mad at some points, and I made this phone call um, on an old line that went via Lagos back to Europe. And I called my home line at home, and my mum picked up the phone, and I could just hear her voice, because in those days you could hear all sorts of other voices on the line. Everyone was sharing this kind of copper cable, and I heard my mum, and I imagined her standing where she would be standing by the phone in our house at home, and she was saying hello, hello, and I shouted down the line. I said, "Mum, mum, hello!" This I hadn't spoken to them for 6 months. It was a long time. They hadn't heard from me. And I shouted and shouted, "Mum, mum." And she eventually heard my voice above all the kind of din over the line. And she went, "Gavin, Gavin." And she started shouting, "Gavin, Gavin." And all I could think of at that moment was shouting back to her, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and crying. And then the line went dead, and they didn't hear from me for another 3 months.
No need to find
Honestly,
another phone. It was
honestly.
enough. Amazing, amazing. So so that took you 6 months to go across the Sahara.
Well, yes, it was a journey that was the kind of foundation of everything.
Mm.
Because I hitched down to Marseille, I got on board a ship, I ended up in Algiers. Um, I was in Algiers, and I hadn't done my homework very well at the time. Algeria was going through what was basically a civil war, so I wasn't really in a very popular position, and I was arrested because I was taking photographs of buildings around the city. I didn't realize that one of them was a police station, and I was arrested and I was thrown in jail. So the first part of my Great Saharan crossing was spent in an Algerian jail, and it wasn't a proper um, jail. It was kind of like a holding cell. While they waited for my case to come up, but being a kind of foreigner, I was easy prey, and that was very difficult. It wasn't an easy experience at all, and I managed to bribe my way out of that situation because I'd carved a little hole in the bottom of my shoe into which I'd folded some dollars. So at the right point, I was able to get that out and bribe my way out of the jail. Um, and I grabbed my rucksack, which was in a little hostel room, still there, thank goodness, and got a bus out of Algiers up into the mountains. Arrived in the night, slept on the side of the road, and the next day started walking and crossed the Atlas Mountains, and got to a little point called Gardea, where there's a great signpost which says "Gateway to the Sahara Desert," and then underneath it says "Do not go alone." and and I started walking, south, and I basically followed a route that was obviously north south, but I was always kind of parallel to that road. So I kind of assessed it. I justified what I was doing by the fact that I was parallel to that road. Um, but the road wasn't entirely straight, and I got lost quite a lot of times. And uh, I also just, I was alone for a long time, and I hadn't really counted on that, on what that does to the human mind, and how during that kind of experience you kind of, without any stimulus, without anybody to kind of um, stimulate your thoughts or to answer your arguments or chat or converse, I think you kind of pass across the boundaries of sanity and insanity, but you don't really realize it at the time. And I've read about this a lot, actually. And there were definitely times where I felt I kind of passed a boundary. Um,
Mm. So, and what did you? What? Yeah. When you finished, what did you? When you came out and you looked back on it, was there anything that you, in particular, that you kind of took out of that? What were the like main things you learned, like you say, about yourself, about mental strength, about, kind of how? Yeah. What were those? What were those key things?
well, one was that this is what I wanted to do. This was my life. It was ridiculous, an absolutely stupid thing to do in retrospect. I wouldn't recommend it. When I got to the southern end of the desert, my plan was to reach the Niger River, and go through into Niger, and then basically get off at Timbuktu. That was my aim. And one of my other aims was to visit this absolutely incredible Catholic um, church that had been built on top of a mountaintop in the Hogar Mountains, and it's all part of that kind of missionary story, that missionary history of North Africa. And I found it. I found that place, and there is still a French um, Catholic priest living there. It's a tiny, tiny little chapel built by a French priest called Charles de Foucauld, who had travelled across the Sahara in the late 1800s and had built this chapel by himself, had lived there for 18 years in absolute solitude, and then been disemboweled for his efforts. And this story just amazed me. And I followed his footsteps, and I made it to the little chapel. But when it came to that moment of talking to the priest, not that I'm religious in any sense, I wasn't going there for religious kind of reasons, it was just the history of it. I couldn't talk to him. I'd kind of become feral, and I remember hiding in the rocks outside, um, kind of like a dog, really. Um, yeah, that was quite an experience to kind of realize that I'd kind of lost a lot of my civilized self. But I was at the bottom of the Sahara. I had come back, and I had no money and I had no way. And when I got to the border with Niger, going back to this issue of a civil war in Algeria, I couldn't cross the border. So I had to turn around. And I came back at a kind of almost in the same way, but as a slight kind of angle, and ended up in Morocco. And I had one experience where the longest single period on my own was 14 days crossing at the Erg Chesh. And by that time, my body had adapted such that I was able to survive on a litre of water a day. This is quite significant because I carried a rucksack on my back and I carried a water rucksack on my front. And the water rucksack carried 15 litres, which I was able to. So my entire journey was from water hole to water hole. But at the beginning, I needed 3 litres to survive. So I had to fight, with 15 litres. I knew exactly how many water holes I needed to find and how many days I had to live, really, because the water sloshing around in my water sack was my timeline. But 6 months later, having walked to over 2,000 kilometers, my body had adapted. I mean, let's put it this way: I looked a bit like Yoda. Uh, I hadn't washed in all that time. My hair was very long, but had formed this kind of weird sculpture on the top of my head, which I could knock as if it was made of wood. Um, I was kind of walking along barefoot a lot of the time. Almost everything in my rucksack that I'd brought with me had gone now, and I carried mostly camel dung and bits of wood to make a fire. I had no sleeping bag. I hadn't taken a sleeping bag for the. Sorry, I had no tent. I had a sleeping bag, but I had no tent. So I just slept out in the sand. But my sleeping bag was now disgusting. And most nights when I slept, I shared my sleeping bag with all the cold-blooded animals that found me, like insects and snakes and so on, who would crawl inside my bag. Um, and I crossed the Erg Chesh. I'd still find this remarkable just to say it, that I did it with a little compass, a little handheld compass, and a Michelin road map, which at that time was the only map around that had the position of all the water wells on it, little water points. And when I was looking for a village called Tahit. When I eventually saw that village, and I saw that it was just so tiny, it was like a little huddle of desert buildings. And I realized that by crossing that desert, I mean, had I been at 1 degree off, I would have missed that village by several kilometers. I had my first breakdown. It was an emotional break. When I look back on it now, I realize it was an emotional breakdown. And I went down to the village, and then I spent time in Morocco, and yeah, that was quite fun, living in Marrakesh and so on, and then made my way back to Europe. It took 3 years to talk about that trip. I have to say it was almost like a kind of PTSD, but I couldn't really talk about it with anybody. And
Wow.
I had a lot of physical reactions. So I came back to Northern Ireland. I was very drawn to Northern Ireland as a home, and I remember friends saying to me, come down to the pub, have a drink," and I would go in to this packed bar, and I would start shaking, physically, uncontrollably shaking, and I would have to go out and sit in my car and just grip the steering wheel and get through what really was an anxiety attack,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
being back in, you know,
yeah.
in our world.
Civilization, yeah, yeah. Hey, mate, amazing. You walk across the Sahara, and the thing that breaks you is the Irish pub. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the there's so many adventures you've had, Gavin. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours about all the different things you've done there. You know, like driving the UN trucks, living in the slums in Kenya, the things you did in Rwanda. But I'm conscious. I think we're going to have a second a second round of delving into those things. So I'm gonna. I feel terrible for doing it, but I'm going to kind of skim across those crazy, amazing things that you did, because you said you were on the road for about 11 years doing adventures, and then you got to a point. Tell us how it kind of grew into setting up Adventure Alternative. At what point did you decide, all right, I'm going to do something different now?
Well, it just organically morphed into an adventure travel company because I was making money, mostly just cash, from guiding. I was living in Nairobi. I was living in Nepal. I was taking people on trips. I was doing a huge amount of climbing, like just back-to-back expeditions, really, and not just mountains, all types of stuff. And I'd made a lot of friends, and most of those friends were Kenyans and Tanzanians and Russians and Nepalese and Sherpas and people in different parts of the world. And I wanted to give them work. And I realized that I was in a position to kind of set up a company to formalize it into a company that I could use to effectively bring all these disparate, all these strands together into one thing. And a very, very big part of my motivation was to provide employment and a career to the people I'd made friends with, the people who I'd climbed with and lived with and kind of spent, really key moments of my life with. And that remains the same today. And the adventure alternative, the kind of business model, um, was really based around me sharing the money. It all boils down to money, doesn't it, Tom? Like, we talk about sustainable this and ethical that and so on. It really is about how you share the money. At that time in my life, I didn't really feel as if I needed a lot of money. I lived out of a rucksack. I just went on my trips. I didn't own anything. I didn't have any overheads, really. And I wasn't married. So I could just be my own agent. But what was really important to me was that the trips that I was running would enable me to give all those friends of mine a sustainable lifestyle, a financially sustainable lifestyle whereby they could, not just look after their children consistently, but also manage their home without the kind of this kind of living in this shadow of kind of day rates, but also have.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you give us a quick? So when you talk about your friends in those places, who were those friends? What were they doing? What was their kind of life? What did it look like?
Well, in Nepal, I'd spent a lot of time in various villages in the Solar Khumbu. So I'd done a lot of climbing and trekking in Nepal, and I'd simply met a lot of people who had invited me to their homes, and I'd gone to those villages, and out of that came moving mountains because I started to kind of be part of that community and contribute to it. So they were people who I'd climbed and trekked with and then spent time in their villages. In Kenya, um, one of my jobs had been working as a kind of freelance aid driver. And most of the aid drivers working for the aid agencies like the UN and so on were Kenyans. We lived in Nairobi. We didn't have any money. And I lived in the slums. Well, for on and off for about 6 or 7 years. And during that time, I worked for various organizations, including a government-based kind of drive to put street children back into school and reunite them with their families. I was very involved with that. Um, and then with organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, building clinics in the slums around Nairobi. And I lived with them, and they were my friends, and we ate together and drank together, and yeah, partied together. They were all Kenyans, and then on the weekends I might then travel across to Tanzania and with meet my friends there, and we'd go off and climb Kilimanjaro, and I would take some clients with me, and I would end up with a handful of cash at the end of that. I would take it back to Kenya. I would go to the jails in the slums, and I would bribe the police to release the kids out of jail because so many street children were jailed. Um, and then then I began working in the schools and setting up these kind of after school clubs and this kind of whole program around helping street kids. That was the start of Moving Mountains. And I was able to formalize that into Moving Mountains, which became my charity, and almost at the same time as Adventure Alternative.
I was going to say, did they happen? Did they happen kind of simultaneously?
Yeah, they did, and there was a plan to that actually. Unusually, there was a plan, and the plan was that I always felt that Adventure Alternative would be the income generating body that would enable me to pay people salaries and give people money from tourism, but that Moving Mountains would be a charitable kind of arm of that that would enable me to provide kind of capital costs. So in my mind, there was always two sides to it. There was the capital costs of building, say, a school or a hydroelectric power plant in the mountains, which was one of my big projects, which was big money, $100,000. That was something which I had to fundraise for myself in some way, and I used mountaineering as my way of doing it. But then at the same time, there was this company, and the company would provide you know the the cash for those people to maintain a lifestyle for a long time. I mean, really a long time, and they still do. 30 years later, it's still their
Because
life.
and then to give people the context, then Adventure Alternative, give a brief overview of what Adventure Alternative does as
So,
as a business.
I mean, it's an adventure travel company. That's what I do. I provide treks and safaris and climbing holidays all around the world now. Um, I've tended to concentrate on those countries where I've lived and I know a lot about it, and I've built up the huge kind of network of friends and colleagues and so on. I feel I feel very comfortable operating there. I feel as if I'm part of those communities. So Adventure Alternative was set up and became formalized eventually in 2001. Prior to that, I ran it as a kind of sole trader. And Moving Mountains was, again, I ran myself for a long time during the 90s, but then it was set up in 2001 as a registered charity. And the two absolutely operate in tandem with each other. Um, the tourism from Adventure Alternative feeds money into the communities where I've lived and worked for so long, but it also enables me to bring um, capital to the projects that Moving Mountains does. And at the same time, my own exploits, my own climbing, my own expeditions, and so on, enabled me to raise money. So they all worked in tandem because I was building myself a profile as a climber. And obviously, once you start climbing the likes of Mount Everest, then you do have a profile. That profile enabled me to raise a lot of money. It enabled my company to get a lot of clients. Um, the clients became, when I was on trips with my clients, that was my marketing time because people would come to these villages, come to these places with me. They would learn about the story. They would talk to these friends of mine. They became supporters of the charity. Um, and it was vital to me that the whole premise was based on a long-term ethos. Because one thing I learned, I mean, really, one thing I learned through absolutely years of watching aid agencies and charities and non-profits and NGOs operating in places like East Africa was that there's this kind of short-termism, and that applies to business as well. This short-termism that is fundamentally damaging. It really is a damaging attitude to take to business, especially when it's just about making money. And we know now, we talk about this a lot now, and sustainable tourism is a well recognized kind of feature of tourism, that this short-termist growth only attitude doesn't really lend itself well to ethical tourism, an ethic within tourism.
Yeah, and you've said on that thread, tourism does kind of quite specifically lend itself to that kind of ethical, social approach. There's as you've illustrated there in the description of what you're doing, it really is kind of almost built in a way that you can set things up that way. So why do you think that isn't happening? Kind of what would you say to other travel businesses, small travel businesses, people similar to yourself? How can they do a better job of of making that sort of thing work?
Oh, there's no easy answer to that, Tom, because everyone is driven by financial imperatives, and it boils down to margins, and how much margin you've got and what you've got left over at the end of it. What's your profit, and how you're going to use that profit to drive the growth of your company, and whether you're going to then take on investors who want a return on that money. What sort of company do you want? That's the question. Um, and the problem is that as you become bigger and you become driven by these financial imperatives, the ethical imperatives take a back seat, and it's less about the long-term developmental aims of your what you're selling as a product, and more about cash flow. And it's more about just turnover of money and manipulation of cash, um, and keeping people in jobs, obviously. But I have always maintained that tourism is, by its very nature, given that it's about people and cultures and environments, it's a developmental industry. It's not like we're selling cans of baked beans. We are selling experiences and stories, and we're enabling people to meet, and that's about emotion. That's really about culture. It's about what drives us as human beings. And I know it's easy to say, but if you can manage your money, then put that to the back seat. And I've always kind of maintained that the actual management of the company is a kind of, it's a numerical algorithm, really. It's a structure that you have to build. But what we're doing in tourism is should be predominantly about the product and where we're taking people and the destinations and the lives of those people there. And if you can make that the dominant feature of your business, and unfortunately that means letting go of this ridiculous notion that every business has to grow for no other reason than just that growth is inherently a good and natural cycle of every business. I have never wanted my business to become a huge business because I would lose touch. I would lose touch with all those people, and all I would do is sit in front of my computer looking at Excel spreadsheets every day. Um, that's not what I started my company for. So I want my company to remain at a certain level. I want it to support all the people who it employs. I want it to enable those people to have a job for life, which in a lot of those countries is still a kind of a given, really, or not a given, an aspiration. But I also want it to be small enough to maintain that kind of humanity about it all. Uh, and in some sense, it's about social entrepreneurship. So when I started working at various universities, talking to students who are studying tourism, and then I started working at business schools and so on, and kind of lecturing, I talked a lot about this idea that tourism should really be social entrepreneurship, and I still stand by that. I think it's an important way to categorize an industry, and it shouldn't even really be an industry. It is what it is. It's a massive thing in the world, but it's about social entrepreneurial ethics.
Yeah, I think so. Zoning into just a couple of things that you mentioned there, like there is as you said, with lots of the kind of bigger companies as they grow and the impact of having investors, that whole thing just becomes way more challenging to view that, because all those investors will always judge things from a financial perspective and the bottom line and the profit and all those kind of things. I think where it potentially can land and has more opportunity is it in exactly the kind of format that you've laid out, which is in those smaller businesses, and when people are setting things up, that they are driven to do things that way, and that they can put in and set up a model and follow your model, so that they do great things for all the destinations that they're going to. And I think the other thing that gets lost in this is that it is good for business, and it's good for your own personal well-being of the person who's doing it, and it's also not like you can still live very nicely off the back of doing it. And if you can set a model that is kind of feeds all of those things, then you only become more motivated. You don't need to kind of stack profit and just have suitcases full of cash off the back of it. It's like, no, do something with that profit and that growth. And to your point of the kind of growth side of things, I think the growth, at least from my perspective, and kind of some of the things that we've talked about, Gavin, and that we're now going to be doing with you. It's like I'm kind of motivated to grow the business, but that growth is not measured by kind of profit that we're making. It's measured by what we're giving away. It's like we're making this, and what impact can we have, and that being the thing that because I feel like if we can grow our business and service more clients, then we'll be able to make more profit, but all that profit then goes to Moving Mountains and the other charities that we support. So I think if it's almost a bit of a call to arms to this, the smaller travel businesses out there that are independently owned, or the people who are thinking about setting something up, that they can do it in a way that is both gives them personally a nice life, but it also helps their business be steadier and have more stability. But then you also get this wonderful thing that you can make lots and lots of other people's lives who are in much more challenging scenarios than we are, a whole lot better. And that's, that for me is what knowing you and hearing more about what you've done, that's kind of inspired me to look into our stuff and kind of what we can do about that. And it's all come off the back of Moving Mountains, really, and what you've done.
Well, I mean, if you look at an organization like ATO, which is the Association of Independent Tour Operators, you'll find, well over 100 small independent tour operators, all owner managers, all with really interesting backstories, all starting their business on a passion, really. And it's really inspiring. But there are these financial imperatives. As a tour operator, the costs of running a business like that go up and up and up. The legislation, the rules by which we operate by, and so on, the cost of that is expensive. And therefore, to some extent, you've got to you've got to make it work financially. It's a really difficult question. I think it's such an individual thing, isn't it, Tom? Like, why are you in? But why did you start up your own business? What is your aim with all of this? Is it to become a millionaire, or is it to do something else? These are really individual, personal decisions and thoughts. And inevitably, if it's like a small company, then it kind of transpires in the ethos of your company, doesn't it? What you've set up in your company is so much a reflection of you, and you are just the sum of all your experiences and parts. So inevitably, what you're doing now with your company is obviously going to be based on that. But there is this great pressure to grow and grow and grow. And I think we're going through a great transition at the moment where we're really questioning those norms, and how business is run and what business means, and how we kind of can reconcile the benefits and the damages of different businesses, and I don't know how this will play out, especially in the world of travel in the coming years. But I suspect that smaller companies will become smaller, kind of boutique companies, I suppose, will become quite popular, actually, because people want that personal connection. They really want that experience to be something really quite special, and they question the provenance of things in the way that we question the provenance of what we buy in the shops now. Where was it made? Where was it produced? Where was it grown? We're gradually reaching that point, and that is definitely the case in travel now. Like, so many people inquiring about my holidays will question me on the kind of ethics of my company, and rightly so. Absolutely, I want people to do that. It's really important.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think it's a great thing. I think obviously the wider world is definitely, more of a lens is being shined upon those kind of things. And it again, going back to this idea of, if you are doing something, you have to choose between do you do something good for business and good for profit, or do you sort of almost be a sacrificial lamb to help others? Like, to me, they're not like mutually exclusive things. I think if you do those good things, then you will then feel the benefit from a business perspective, because people more and more are recognizing the importance of that kind of thing. And like you say, from a travel perspective, I think that the spotlight shone even more on it, because it is experiential, and you are going and experience, kind of seeing other people. And if you're the kind of company that just doesn't care about that, then I think you'll get found out pretty quickly. So yeah, for me, it's, I guess, trying to examples of people like you who have approached things in this way, I think is great. And I said at the start about sharing what you're doing, and it's kind of with the hope of people seeing like, oh, here's a model that we can follow and we can use as inspiration, that that does work and is doing fantastic things.
And one of the problems with that is that, because in terms of marketing, is that the way in which we market now, and the way in which we find products, has become anonymized through this prism of the online shopping model, and it's all done through websites and so on. I had a website many years ago, and but actually all my marketing was done face to face. Back in the day, like 25 years ago, I went on trips and we sat around in the tent around the table. We walked together, we hiked together, and I talked to people. And some of my clients in those days would stay with me for 5, 6, 7 years, and they would do maybe 10 trips with me. And then when I was back home, when I did come back home, I would go and visit walking clubs, and we would go and spend a day in the hills, and then I would do a talk in the evening about some trip I'd done, and afterwards we'd have a drink and there'd be talk, and they would say, oh, do you know what, we've always wanted to go to Nepal. And that was my marketing, and it became my me, and my story was very much kind of integral to the promotion of what I was trying to do with the company, and obviously the charity. Nowadays it's really difficult to get your story across in a personal, face-to-face way, and if we're all just going to be measured on the basis of our website and how high we appear on Google or a search engine, and what our statistics are according to our search engine optimization and so on, then that's difficult, because there are companies that are bigger than me, that have got a lot more money, that can absolutely easily wipe me out in that respect. Yeah, that's tricky. However, as I've seen that kind of rise of online marketing, I've also seen parallel to it, and maybe I'm hesitating because this may be specific to the type of clients I attract, people who want to climb mountains or whatever, that people now deliberately disassociate themselves from that, and they want to talk to me. They want to speak to somebody on the telephone and talk about climbing and what their aims and aspirations are. And in that respect, now as a qualified mountain leader, I spend a lot of time mentoring people who want to climb mountains, and maybe they've got a long-term plan to climb a particular peak, or reach 7,000 meters, or do something in the Himalayas, and that might be a 5-year plan that we work on together. Yeah. And it's become a personal relationship again, which is great. But this kind of balancing the online world and the anonymous nature of that with your kind of personal story, I find that quite difficult. I really do.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one for you. I mean, we were joking about before we came on about you saying you don't like seeing yourself on screen and things like that. And there's obviously people who they use social media as that outlet to do that, as this kind of storytelling platform. But there's got to be a certain kind of character to feel comfortable going and doing that on a regular basis, and almost shouting from the rooftops about the things that they do. And again, kind of referring back to the intro, you're so understated about some of the things. I mean, all these amazing things that we're talking about here, it probably took me about 18 months of working with you to kind of start hearing some of them. And you're not one to kind of go and broadcast them. And I think that's kind of what the real life equivalent has become with social media, which can be extremely effective, but is kind of, it's about doing it in the right way, and again, it being the right fit for the right person, and it not being something that everyone's comfortable with. But I think this, I totally agree with you with the cycle of, the internet came around, people just sort of decided they didn't need to speak to anyone anymore because they could find out what they wanted online. And I do think we're kind of coming around the other side of that now, where it's become so ubiquitous that no one trusts anything online anymore. So they do want to speak to the real person again and understand the experience. They don't want to read an SEO optimized piece of text on a page. They want to find out the real story from a human. And that's where I think the people like you and the other small travel businesses can really benefit from that, if they show off their personality on the website and they don't get sucked into the trap of just becoming the same as everyone else. So if you have a story to tell and you have interesting things to say and you set yourself apart, then I think the world is moving back that way.
Well, I mean, yes, nothing ever goes back to what it was, but I'm really happy to see that there's still that desire for the kind of personalization of what we're involved with. Because if you want to climb Kilimanjaro and you put that into your search engine, I mean, there's 1,000 companies out there, and the wording and the promotional element of it is just overwhelming. It is absolutely overwhelming. But ultimately, if you have an aspiration to climb that mountain, it really boils down to 4 a.m. in the morning on summit day, and that moment when it's a bit like running a marathon, where you kind of go through that wall of cold and tiredness and altitude, and for some people, like a real physical and emotional kind of journey to reach that top for all sorts of reasons. That is a human thing. It's a very personal human thing. And I've walked alongside so many people in my life at that moment where their eyes have changed from saying, I can't do this, to I can do this. That is what I love about my job. That ability to, and having the skills and the wherewithal to enable people to sort of have that change in outlook on life, because the mountain is therefore triggers something else. It becomes something that you can take back home with you and apply to different areas of your life. I've never been one of those people who kind of anthropomorphizes mountains to the extent of thinking that they're the answer to all your problems. You just have to go up a mountain. I just don't believe that. But I do think that what you go through on the mountain is an experience you can bring back home and apply. And for some people, it is a revelation to stand on top of a peak and look around you and say, "Wow, I just did that." That's a very powerful experience, and it's a privilege. I always say this, but the word privilege I really mean that. It's a privilege to be part of that journey for people. Sometimes it's so emotional. It's honestly, Tom, it's so emotional. Years ago, I took a group of about 25 young people aged from they were about 12 to 18, and they came from a hospital in outside Johannesburg, and they were all children who had suffered horrific burns, and they were so badly burned that they'd been ostracized by their own families. They had no ears, no noses. They had, in some cases, no hands. They had no toes. It was awful to see. Honest to goodness, it was hard not to to show such shock on your face when they first came off the bus and I met them at the hotel in Moshi, the base of Kilimanjaro. And the lady who ran the small charity that looked after these children said to me, I just want these children to experience some hope in their life, to do something that is away from the confines of this little hospital room where they lived, absolutely ostracized by family and society. They all summited Kilimanjaro. Every one of those kids summited.
Wow.
And when I look back on it and I see the level of support they gave each other, the love that they held for each other, the way they'd created their own family, it puts the hairs back on my neck just talking about it. There are parts of Kilimanjaro where you have to kind of use your hands and scramble. And these children, some of them, without arms, were just using their teeth, their shoulders to help each other to get up that mountain. We all stood on the top, and everybody was crying. We were just in floods. What an emotional experience that was. I'll never forget that moment. That's a big reason why I love my job, to have the privilege of those moments.
Amazing. You mentioned marketing and kind of some of the ways you've gone about your marketing. Is there anything else, in addition to that kind of face-to-face kind of returning people kind of angle that have been particularly successful for you, Gavin?
There's just no doubt that one of the big weaknesses of my company is that it is driven by me. And there are all sorts of issues around succession there. But if I started my company on the basis of me doing it, and then I employed some people, and then I built that company on my profile. I mentioned earlier on about how you build a profile as a climber, and you do all this stuff, and you write articles, and people write articles about you, and blah blah blah. And then you start to gain clientele, and you become popular, and yeah, it's quite exciting. It goes through a kind of a steep increase, and then it kind of plateaus, and then you realize, goodness, I've got to keep this up. I've got to carry on doing this. And at the same time, I had a charity, and the charity was beginning to gain traction as well, and I was taking on commitments. And at one point, there were hundreds of children we were, Moving Mountains was putting through school. I was, building hospitals and schools and hydroelectric power plants and all sorts of stuff, all of which cost money. And I had to shoulder, all of that. I take that responsibility very seriously. And that's the reason that I was doing Everest so many times. I mean, that was my motivation, really. But then it
Tell
comes
us
to
about
a
that,
point.
and tell us about Everest, because you've mentioned Everest a couple of times. Tell us what you did. Okay. In fact, tell us about some of the big challenges that you've done to raise money for Moving Mountains.
Well, so 1999, coming up to the new millennium, do you remember all that kind of, pizzazz around what was going to happen? And there was lots of millennial events planned. So I planned the Millennium 7 Summits expedition, and I basically took myself out of the company for a whole year. And I went off and I wanted to climb the 7 summits, which is the highest peak on each of the 7 continents, inside 1 year. And I also wanted, obviously, being one of those being Mount Everest, which I hadn't climbed up until that point, but I had climbed other 8,000 meter peaks. I'd been doing, well, upwards of 20 years of climbing now, so I felt ready for it. And I just left it. I'm not saying I dumped the company, but I felt that I just needed to go off by myself and kind of go back to that kind of Saharan mentality, just being out there. But I also wanted to raise money. I actually did it not just for Moving Mountains. I raised money for Comic Relief. And when I went to Comic Relief and said, "This is what I want to do," they said, "Well, we'd be very happy if you raise money for Comic Relief, but we can't endorse what you do because there's too much risk, and if you die, then that will be bad PR for us." I said, okay, never mind. I'll still wear a red nose. So I wore a red nose on top of all these peaks. And when I was in
Right.
Antarctica, and it's a squashy red nose, which kind of clips onto your nose. You know the one. And when I did Mount Vinson in Antarctica, it was minus 50 below, and my little squashy red nose was like a billiard ball, and it wouldn't fit onto my nose, so I just had to hold it in front. But anyway, I went off and did that did that expedition, and it was a great PR event, I suppose, to be a bit kind of cynical about it. It was fantastic for my company. It really, really was great. Unfortunately, it also collapsed my company because I had no business during that time. So I had to restart the whole thing, which is why when I said earlier on, I started in 2001. I restarted the company actually as a limited company in 2001. I got somebody to help invest in it at that point because I had no money. And I started again. Um, but the kind of that profile that I've mentioned before, I now had something really to aim towards. Moving Mountains was building quite rapidly. The company, I was doing really well. So I decided to go off and climb Everest again. And there was another reason for that, and that is that when it comes to mountaineering and climbing, and because I'm so influenced by mountaineers in my life, specific mountaineers. The aesthetic of the climbing is really important to me. So my big mentor, my biggest influence in mountaineering was a British climber called Doug Scott, who kind of pioneered alpine style climbing. He was a great thinker. He had a great aesthetic around climbing, and as I got older, I was really privileged to get to know him. Um, and meet him on quite a few occasions and do lectures with him and so on. And yeah, he was a big influence on me. So anyway, the reason I'm saying that is because I then went back to Everest with a desire to climb it without bottled oxygen and without the levels of support that you normally associate with Everest expeditions. And this really puts the whole expedition into a whole different light when you're climbing without bottled oxygen and you're climbing without Sherpas who typically would carry all the bags, and also crucially, you're making your own decisions. When you talk to people who've climbed Mount Everest, you will find that the vast majority are clients. They've climbed Mount Everest, but they were clients, and that meant that when it came to it, they didn't actually make the decisions about when to climb, what to do on the climb, where to set how to set your camps up, what to do. Um, so the decision-making process, I've never been a client. I've always been a mountain leader. I've always been qualified as a mountain leader. So um, I wanted to experience Everest at its most kind of, uh, you know, basic level, which meant climbing without all of those support mechanisms, which is what I did. So I went off in 2002 to climb Mount Everest with a friend of ours on the north, with a friend of mine on the north face, which was without oxygen and only one tent for the whole expedition on the mountain. We used one tent, um, and then I went back in 2005 again uh, without oxygen. This time on the south side by myself, and I only used two camps, and I just carried my own bag. And then I went back in 2007 to do a solo traverse of Everest without oxygen, and this time with no camps at all. And then in 2009, I went back with clients. I took some clients on the south side that was with oxygen. And then in 2011, I went back again with clients and oxygen and Sherpas. So that was a kind of commercial expedition that I was running. But all my big experience, well, I say they're all big experiences on Everest, but the big experiences were when I was by myself, or in particular the one in 2002 when myself and my friend called Will were climbing the North Face without oxygen. And what happened was we had climbed very successfully throughout the whole expedition. We're talking about a 10-week trip, and we were about 150 meters from the top, just at what's known as the second step, which is a couple of ladders which kind of were pinned against the rock. So you're at about 8,600 meters, and Will didn't fall, but he dislocated his kneecap and collapsed against the rock. So there we were, alone on the mountain, because when you're climbing without oxygen, you're a lot slower than everybody else who's using oxygen. And I was just alone up there with Will, and he was lying on the ground. And you're at a place where there's so little oxygen in the atmosphere that your mental acuity is estimated to be probably 20% of what it is at sea level. You're really operating at some instinctive level, which is a combination of your life experience on mountains. And there I was standing above my friend, lying on the ground, with the sheer knowledge that the mortality rate amongst people climbing without oxygen is about 1 in 3, and people who have accidents on Everest at that level don't make it. There's a lot of bodies up there to testament to that. So anyway, we started down the mountain, and it took 3 days. That's 3 days without food and basically licking the ice off the rocks. And I carried him, I dragged him, and he was able to kind of stumble on one leg. And there's a point at which you're on this kind of the northeast ridge of Everest, and then there's the north face, which is 14,000 feet straight down, pretty steep, mixed snow and ice and rock, obviously. And we headed down this face pretty much on our backsides almost all the way. And I remember so many times just passing in and out of consciousness, really. And it reminded me of that description I made earlier on about passing out of insanity in the desert by myself. You kind of lose touch with reality. You really lose kind of sense of time and place. And we were just in that very, very little small world of ours, a world of survival. And we gradually went down. And every time, I would be holding Will to me, and he would be kind of holding on to me, and we'd slide down a bit, and he would be grunting and groaning with the pain of it in his leg, and I can be sort of, I couldn't talk because we were so dehydrated. My tongue was kind of extruded from my mouth. It was all cracked and dried. We couldn't really talk to each other, but we reached a level of kind of communication. And there was one point where Will would be his head on my shoulder, and he would whisper into my ear in this kind of scratchy voice, and he would say, "Come on, Gavin, you can do this. We can do this. We can do this." And I would say, just shut up, Will. Let me carry on. I've got. And we made it down to our tent, which was at about 8,100 meters, and it was still there. And getting into the tent was a big deal. And we lay there. And at one point in the middle of the night, it was a pretty dismal night. Will basically passed out, and I thought he died. And as I sat there, we only had one sleeping bag, by the way. We were hot bagging, so I'd given him the sleeping bag, and I was on my knees just by him, rocking backwards and forwards through the night to keep warm, just rocking backwards and forwards. We had no food or anything. We were just a real kind of end point. And I suddenly realized that I couldn't feel my feet. I know that sounds daft, but in that environment, these things come slowly. And I also realized that sometime on our descent, I'd peed myself, and the urine had gone down my leg and literally filled my boots and had frozen. So my feet had been encased in frozen pee for a long time. Oh goodness! I remember taking my boots off and this kind of frozen sock, hacking it off and trying to get some heat back into my socks. And then Will woke up and looked at me, and I looked at him. I said, "Hello," and hello, and goodness, the daybreak came, And we started back down the mountain, and I don't know why I did this. I really don't know. But anyway, I actually carried all our gear down as well. I had stuff hanging off my harness, which I kicked in front of me, and Will kind of round me, and we hobbled down the mountain. We got down to Camp 1, which is about 7,000 meters, so it's still pretty high. And there's a little abseil section where you come off onto basically the Rongbuk Glacier. It's not a difficult abseil, like in normal circumstances. Okay, it's high, but it's not too difficult. But I got myself in a right mess, Tom, and I was trying to abseil with Tom. So I was trying to abseil off with him in my arms, and I got it all wrong. I got it all mixed up, and we ended up dangling on this rope. And I thought, well, this is it. There's nobody on the mountain. The weather was awful. We're just going to die here. We're just going to hang here, and that's it. Nothing. And we were spinning, literally, just, and all of a sudden, a voice came down at us from the top of the abseil, and a little face appeared over, and it was a Sherpa who'd been in his tent at Camp 1. There's quite a few tents there, and he said, "Namaste." He said, "Do you want some help?" I said, "Yes, yes, yes, please." I actually think yes. Here's the answer, and we made it back to base camp. That was a phenomenal experience, getting off Everest in 2002. Yeah, big one.
Tell us about that. You've mentioned a couple of things that you do with moving mountains. So you've mentioned the power plant that you put in. You've kind of touched on schools and things like that. What's at the core of the kind of goal of the charity? Why did you set it up? Where does the money predominantly go to?
So the core ethos is long term, especially when you're dealing. In my case, in Kenya, it began with street children. When I was working in Nairobi, and I was doing the job of trying to reunite street children with their families and put them into school, that physically meant going into these kind of slums and on the streets of the city and so on, and talking to kids, and quite often having photographs which we would then go into the slums and show to people, and we would say, "Do you know this child? Do you know this child?" And it was just a kind of, it was just waiting for somebody to say, "Oh yes, I know that child," and maybe that child had run truant, maybe that child was just an orphan. There are lots of reasons, but one of the reasons that they were street children was because they were beneficiaries of Western charities. And this was shocking to me. Um, and what I discovered was that uh, a charity that would come in and say, "Well, we've built a children's home," and they would take a load of kids and they would put those kids into that home, uh, they would potentially run out of money, or the cost of maintaining that child when that child became, going to secondary school, for example, became too much to manage, and they were sent back. But what happens when a 11-year-old child is taken away from a family, put into a home run by an NGO, and then after a year or so put back into that same family? What happens? The answer is that the family ostracizes that child, and the child and the child becomes an outsider, and the child then is forced into this kind of gang life on the streets, and they kind of form gangs because that's a secure unit, if you like. But those gangs turn to crime and whatever, begging and so on. And I was shocked at how many of those children were ex-beneficiaries. In many ways, those children were kind of victims of a Western malaise in respect of charity, because we want to build something, or we want to have something that's um, visible for our money. We want return on the investment. We want to see something. But actually, what's more important than a building is the child's life, and the support network you build around that child's life. So one of the reasons I called it Moving Mountains is because this is a lifetime's work. This isn't a child that you can just kind of take on board for a little bit and then just dump and think, oh, well, you're fine now. These are children who've suffered immense trauma in their short, young lives, who haven't got the um, emotional wherewithal to deal with it, who will suffer adult mental health problems because of that experience. So moving mountains became, in my mind, about the long-term support of those children. So this was back in the early 90s. Those kids who I was working with in the streets, and uh, I was then putting into a school, and I was working at the school, uh, are now adults. They're now fathers, mothers, parents, but they're also employed, and they're also still beneficiaries of moving mountains. They're not getting their school fees paid by me or by the charity anymore, but they're still part of that charity. The charity became, in many ways, a kind of surrogate family. It became an emotional support for that child. And what I tried to do was to build that that emotional support that we have in it in our society we take for granted. So it comprises obviously family, extended family, community services, the tribal community that exists there, the church, everything that exists to support the child. I imagined as a kind of ball with the child kind of suspended in the middle of it, protected, and that's what I always aimed to do. And I'm just incredibly proud. You know, that sounds terribly kind of self-aggrandizing, but I am proud that those kids who I brought up in those years, they were 5 years old, 6 years old. You know, they're 25 and 30 years old now, and they're decent people. You know, they've got a career, they've got a job, and they have fundamentally achieved social mobility, to use a phrase. They've gone from being victims of, you know, that kind of upbringing to being employed middle class people with children of their own, and their children will not suffer the same uh, trials and tribulations that they did.
Yeah. And how many children have you seen through, Gavin, up to now?
I mean, it's thousands. It's thousands, and then the natural kind of um, the natural growth is the wrong word. It's just how it continued was then to go into schools and say, well, how can I help this school become a better place for these kids? And I'm not really making myself clear, but the reason that children become street children is often down to some very kind of the minutiae of their life. For example, if you've got a set of parents who work all day and come home at 6 o'clock at night from their job, but school finishes at 3 o'clock, then what does a child of 7 years old do between 3 and 6? What do? Because school's over, they don't want to sit in a hot hut in the slums because it's stinking hot and there's nothing to do. So they go outside and they play and they run around and they become victims of all sorts of stuff going on. You know,
Mm.
there's really a lot of things that can happen to a child in that environment, not
Yeah.
least picked up and arrested. You would be shocked the number of children who were just picked up and put into jail. And back in those days, um, as I said before, I would go off and do my climbs and taking clients up Mount Kenya or safaris or whatever I was doing, whatever job I was doing. I would go down to the jail with a handful of cash and I would go into the jail, and in the cell there would be 30, 40 children, and they would be standing because there was no room to sit. And I would say, how much? How much to release all those kids? All of them. And the guy would say, you know, well, whatever you've got. And I would get those kids out and I would take them to the school, and there was a big central courtyard in the school, and they would be washed, and then the parents would come from all around and they would come for their children. And that's the point I would say, listen, we need to work this out. How are we going to deal with that 3 hour gap in the day when your children are just running around? How would we? And the answer was after school clubs. I
Mm.
set up reading clubs and sports clubs. We grew crops in the school grounds. We did all sorts of things, and gradually that developed into a program. And that program eventually cost money. And I then took that program and I converted it, aspects of it, into a thing which I called AfriCamp, which is like a kind of, well, imagine it as a kind of summer camp for kids, where I would, at some point, I would have 500 children on a summer camp for a couple of weeks, and then I would bring people from school, people from here, to come and run it with me, and those people became my biggest fundraisers. They were my biggest fundraisers, and that kind of enabled things to move. And that AfriCamp, the first one I did was in 1991. It's still going every single year, not just one, lots of them. And it's fantastic. It's such an experience. It really is such a wonderful thing, because you're really just looking at kids being happy, just running around doing stuff that kids could do, um, just without the fear of, well,
I don't think anyone listening, Gavin, would think it's self-aggrandizing to kind of talk about being proud of doing those kind of things. And I go back to the fact that the whole change that we've now made with our business has been inspired by listening to you, and again, hopefully, people who are listening to this, it will have a similar effect on, if it's just one of them, then I'm happy that I've managed to share
yeah,
that, because when you talk about what you've done and you talk about all those things and the impact that it's had, I find it hard to think that people won't want to take a step in the direction of supporting that kind of thing in whatever way that they can. And I think, again, something you mentioned earlier, of that almost like the fear of the first step, or the importance of taking that small step, that's certainly something that resonates with me, and that I think, I saw, as soon I had this idea of changing to like giving all the profit that we make away to you and some other really good causes. And I basically decided I was just going to start telling people about it. So before we'd worked out the kind of the details of it, I just wanted to tell people about it, because for me that was the first step, the small step. And I thought, as long as I've told people about this, then I'm committed and I'm going to have to do it, and we'll work the details out later. But I'll get this on the radar, and I would encourage anyone else who is thinking, oh, that sounds, I'd like to do something like, that listen, trying to emulate what you've done is a massive, a massive task, but just you take that one step in the right direction and you start having an impact. And I'd encourage anyone who's listening to think what that first step is, and just start moving in the right direction.
yeah. I have to say it's a really humbling experience for me to hear you say that, because I'm talking about my personal experiences, and they mean a lot to me, and it motivated me to set up the charity. And I know that when people go to Kenya, in my case, they go and they see what's going on. They also get an emotional link, which becomes their personal kind of story, and it's now their story, not my story. It's their story. And the kids who I mentioned before are adults. They're now running Moving Mountains in Kenya. They're ambassadors. They're the living example of how it's worked out. They've got their story, and they've now established their own relationships with other people who've supported the charity. So this is what I find really quite humbling, is this, that one experience that I had has led on to other people having their own similar experiences, which in some cases have been really, really kind of life changing. They really have. And during lockdown, I have been just so moved by how the circumstances of a lockdown have kind of brought out the best in people in so many ways. Right at the start, it was incredibly difficult. Like, I use a lot of the a lot of the income from Adventure Alternative and the resources I have as a company go into the charity. So at the moment lockdown came, that was it. And suddenly we were looking at all of these commitments, financial commitments we have towards a lot of children. Like we're feeding hundreds of children every day in the street, um, who come off the streets who need fed. I can't just turn around to those kids and say, I'm sorry, there's nothing today. You've got to go home, wherever that is. That's a really hard thing to say to somebody, let alone a child. And and then people started writing and saying, and you being one of them, and saying, hey guys, just you know, can I help? Can I be part of this? That's very humbling. That's a phenomenal thing to experience. Um, and people, for example, clients who had paid my company, I should say, a deposit to go on a holiday, would ring me and say, "Look, it's not going to happen. Obviously, we're in a global pandemic. Could you put my deposit towards moving mountains?" You know that
Wow.
that's the sort of phone call where I just come off the call and I just have to go and stand outside and just look at the horizon for 10 minutes because I just find it so humbling. So yeah, it's a big source of pride, Tom, and I'm just so yeah, I'm just really happy to be working with you on this. I want you to come and see it, as you know, for yourself, because it is an emotional experience, but it means so much to me, um, and yeah, I'd love you to be part of it. I'd love a lot of people to be part of it. It's special.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I can't wait. I think that's as good a moment as any to bring it to a close. Yeah, like I said, listen, you've had a pretty profound effect on me, Gavin. It's great to talk to you about it in a bit more depth. And as I think I say to people every time I speak to you, another story comes out of some crazy adventure or crazy thing that you've done, and you've done it again today. Talking about bringing Will down from the mountain, but yeah, I hope that people who are listening are as engaged with it as I have been. Obviously, we've talked about moving mountains and what you do there. If there's people listening who think they can help in any way, then obviously that's as you've said, gratefully received. And even just to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, I'm super kind of excited to be doing that with you. And like you say, to come and find out a little bit more in person when we're allowed to do so. But yeah, for now, I think we'll bring it to a close, and we'll have to do a round two sometime and come in and explore some more of the things that you've done. What's to finish it off, Gavin? What have you got? Any final thoughts to leave with people? Anything you'd like to ask of people? Kind of share with them, and then where's the best place to come and find you? Is it just the websites of the businesses? Where's the best place to go and find out more?
Oh well, yeah, adventurealternative.com has been around for a while now, so people can find me there. It's just there's a lot of talk now about how the future of travel will, what the future of travel will and tourism will look like after this kind of chasm in global society has kind of hopefully receded and we can move on. And to me, it is really about just thinking more carefully about the way in which we live and the impact of what we do and the importance of living simply and having strong integrity and ethics in what we do and how we consume. Really, I think how we consume is. I've certainly felt that being here where I live in kind of rural Somerset. How we consume things is for me very, very important now, and that goes for travel as well. We have enormous financial power as tourists to do good, um, and we can also do a lot of bad. Um, there's a great film that came out called Gringo Trails. It's a very powerful film. It's quite distressing to watch. It's called Gringo Trails, but it tells the story of the kind of what tourism has done for the good and the bad. And I would just say, in terms of travel, perhaps think about how we travel quite kind of carefully. I have noticed recently that instead of taking 2 and 3 holidays a year and all the associated flights with that, there are more and more people ringing me now saying, I just want to go on holiday once every 2 or 3 years, but I'd like to go for 8 weeks. I'd really like to get to know a place. I'd like to get to know people. And I love that. I think that's a great, great attitude to take.
Amazing. Thanks, Gavin. It's been so good to talk to you.
And you as well, Tom. Thank you.
How about that? What a guy, right? Every time I speak to Gavin, he drops another mind-blowing story that I haven't heard before. So there's no doubt I'll need to get him back on the show so I can grill him some more and uncover a few more incredible tales. Gavin actually inspired me to launch our 100% project, where we are now giving 100% of our profits from SEO travel to charity, one of which is moving mountains to support the fantastic work that Gavin and his team do. If you want to find out more about that, visit movingmountainstrust.org. And you can also go to adventurealternative.com to find out more about Gavin and what he does in the traditional business sense. Or also book an incredible adventure that he, with no doubt, will have, given what we've heard from Gavin in the episode there. You can also go to seotravel.co.uk/Gavin-Bate. That's GAVIN-BATE for all the show notes. And you can also watch the video of the conversation there too. If you go to seotravel.co.uk/podcast, you'll be able to see the other episodes that we're releasing, and you can also get lots of other insight over there too. If you are a travel company looking for marketing support from people who really care about your success, then please do get in touch, seotravel.co.uk, and we'd love to hear from you and see if there's some way that we can help you out. If you enjoyed the show, it would be fantastic and super appreciated if you could review the show on iTunes and share what your favourite bits were there. You could also subscribe to it, and it would be amazing if you could share it with at least one person you know who could benefit from the episode and the insight that Gavin offered. We're just trying to get the podcast off the ground at the moment, and so we can put together more content like that hopefully you find really, really interesting and really helpful. And I'd love to hear from you and find out what you enjoyed so we can continue to hone what we do and bring more content like this your way. We've already got more incredible guests coming up and episodes that are recorded and ready to go. So stay tuned for future episodes. And when you do subscribe, you'll get notified whenever we release new episodes so you can be one step ahead of the game. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, happy travels.